father liked always to drink wine. And so, typical, he started with Bordeaux, and then he drank Burgundy, especially when I was a teenager. And so I could taste with him. And then next door to us lived my maternal grandparents, and my grandfather drank always glass or two of red wine for dinner at the dinner time, for health reasons. You see, so like wine was more or less common in the household. And because my maternal grandmother is a cooking teacher, so cuisine and culinary things is like really, part of our family culture. We all cook, we love to eat. My grandmother had a lot of friendships and interactions with chefs and cooks in Tokyo area. And so we were always often taken out, and so all these things. So like wine never stood alone. Wine was always part of the whole picture. And then cutting things short. Well, my ex-husband is German, and I ended up in Germany. That's already more than 30 years ago. At that time in Germany, even though I had BA degree in international relations, you needed to have master's degree to qualify as a college graduate. And so it was difficult for me to find work, but thanks to apprenticeship system, so Meister system in German, education, I decided to do something really hands-on instead of something academics, because it takes such a long time in Germany. And so I decided to do this apprenticeship, which will lead to have a Meister. And I knocked on the door of a grower in Franconia called Paul Fürst. And I asked him if I could work and learn at his winery, so like Weingut. One of the reasons why I knocked on his door is because he was closest to where I used to live. And then he also made both red and white. So red was Pinot and white was mainly Riesling, and then Pinot Blanc. And so I started out with him, stuck to it for 3 years. After that, I went to study at Geisenheim. While I was at Geisenheim, in my last year, I had the opportunity, I was offered to manage an estate in Rheingau region, estate of 18 hectares that produced Riesling and Pinot Noir called Altenkirch. So I took that opportunity. I made wine in Rheingau for 4 years. But just before I got that job, I had opportunity to do 2 weeks of harvest stage internship in Burgundy, and that was at Simon B's office, because I asked Chisa B's if I could come and work. She said yes. I came, and it was wonderful 2 weeks, because as you know, it's not just from technical point of view, but the whole harvest and vinification process here it has such cultural richness. That was also different from the cultural richness in Germany. I found that fascinating. And there I met my now husband, Guillaume. But I went back to Germany. I made wines for 4 years, and during that time I divorced from my former husband, and then I got together with Guillaume, and one of the things we were talking was one of these days we would make wine together. But for Guillaume to come to Germany and make wine, even though he visited me a couple of times and he was fascinated especially by Riesling, it was unthinkable of moving to Germany because he's a born Burgundian. And so I said, okay, I'm kind of flexible. It broke my heart though, because I loved making Riesling. I still do. I love that grape variety. But anyhow, so I settled down in Burgundy and started making Chanterêves with Guillaume in 2010. And it led to today. So we did our 15th vintage this year. And so arriving in Burgundy, it was very difficult for us to acquire any vines. Well, somehow we searched, but we didn't have the luck. And so we started to work as a négociant, meaning, like buying grapes, making wine. In 2018, we had our first opportunity to buy a small parcel of 100-year-old aligoté, situated between La Doigt-Sérigny and Gaulois. That was big enough to make 4 to 5 barrels of aligoté. And during that time, I was working part-time at Chandon de Briaille in Savigny, part-time, and then I made wine at Chanterêves, and Guillaume continued to work full-time at Simon B's, because Chanterêves was never big enough to support our livelihood. And it was also our aim to make Chanterêves grow so that one day two of us can live from it. So it was a long journey. And then, but it was also very enriching for me to work for Chandon de Briaille, because I was there as a tâcheron. A tâcheron meaning is that you are responsible for a certain parcels of their estate. You do all the manual work there except harvest. So it was great for me because it gave me the flexibility to work at Chandon and work at Chanterêves at the same time. Like, for example, I would be in the vines at Chandon, and if customer or client would come by for the tasting, I could just take off, do the tasting, come back to the vines. As long as the task is done, on time and well, then I was free. And then during the harvest time, I was freed from any obligation, so I could make wine at Chanterêves. And so voila, it was great to have this small parcel of aligoté. In 2020, we had the opportunity finally to buy a sizable chunk of land, which amounted to a total of 4.5 hectares. So divided a little less than 1 hectare in Savigny, a small parcel of Choret Rouge, which is 0.2 hectare, and then 3.3 hectares in Haute-Côte de Beaune. Half of it is aligoté, and then other half is Haute-Côte Blanc, so Chardonnay. And so that was 2020. And then with that, I really needed to become full-time at Chanterêves to take care of all those lands. So I quit Chandon in 2020, and first 1 year and a half, I managed full-time alone. Guillaume became part-time at Chanterêves, and then from 2022 onwards, Guillaume became full-time at Chanterêves. Obvious to me that organic farming was important from the beginning, because even though the first winery where I worked in Germany, Paul Fürst, at that time they weren't organic yet, but very close to organic, I might say, because already at that time the most well-performing German growers would work with cover crop, would renounce herbicide, like minimal use of chemicals. Fürst already made their own compost at that time. And it was already common in Germany at that time that many growers would make their own compost. Everybody had their own house recipe, which fascinated me, and so this whole thing, the philosophy came from the point of view that making wine, 85% is vineyard, and organic farming, because it is very risky meaning that you're much less dependent on chemicals. You need to observe nature and work with it, because you can't take anything for granted, otherwise you will lose your crop very easily. And so it forces you to be attentive to what you are, working with every day. And I love that part. But of course, for the whole idea of, for your health, for the health of the soil, for your practices to be sustainable in every sense, for me, somehow it was obvious. But then again, quickly you would realize that being organic would never be enough, right? Organic is basically prohibiting you to employ medium that is harmful. So it's a big, broad framework. And then how you would, pinpoint things so that you will farm precisely is a whole another subject. So organic farming is a big framework. And then I went to Geisenheim, and there I had, Geisenheim University, where I studied oenology and viticulture. I became a certified engineer after 4 years. There we had a great professors, because there was a professor specialized in organic farming. He was a grower himself, close to Rheingau region. And then there was even at that time in Geisenheim experience going on in doctorate degree studies on biodynamics, which was very rare in the world at that time, I think. So that's 2004. At that time, I think there was like one doctorate research running in Australia, and then in Geisenheim, and that's it, because it's very difficult to get funding. Germany is the land that is, Rudolf Steiner is very established. And so you will get funding probably relatively more easy than countries like France or Italy, or the States. And so the guy who took care of that doctorate degree, we could have a project with him. And so that was again very exciting. Well, seeking other projects often come through interaction with other growers that I respect a lot. One was that there was an opportunity to take lessons from a plant scientist called Eric Poutiot. He works as a consultant near a Swiss border. He's French, since very long time already. And he has developed a very holistic method of keeping plants healthy. But plants, especially, farming plants, like grains, corn, and so for him, viticulture was relatively new. But anyhow, Chamber of Agriculture in many regions in France organizes courses and lessons for growers and farmers. And Guillaume and I had the opportunity to take lessons from Eric Poutiot. So his lesson was about healing plants using plants, mainly with fermented extracts of certain plants, depending on in which state the vineyard is in. It's rather complex because there is no such recipe that here there's a symptom and this is what you use. Actually, that is not it. We first need to analyze the soil. If the soil is tends more to be alkaline or acid driven, if the soil is more reductive or oxidized. And unfortunately, due to modern farming these days, the soil is mostly alkaline and oxidized, which actually enhances susceptibility to sickness. So that needs to be analyzed first to understand which fermented extract you use, you see. And so that was a big challenge. And then what was great though was that there are many growers who take the lessons of Eric Poutiot each year, also in Côte d'Or. So there is a group of growers connected with a WhatsApp group led by a person, chaperone from Chambre d'Agriculture, a Chamber of Agriculture. Like we are now, I think, something between 30 and 40 growers. And so what was helpful was that everybody would do their own experiment, and then they have their experiences. We exchange, and so we can all say, like, for example, this was the situation, this worked, this didn't work, and that already has been going on for how many years now? I think like since 2018. So for us is almost longer than 6 years now. We're actually going to have a reunion next Monday for looking back how 2024 was. And so, for example, one extract that worked very well, and so we apply each year now relatively intensely, is extract from horsetail, because it contains a high amount of silicium. You call it silica. There you go. Which you can also find in 501. So the biodynamic preparation. It's very interesting. Well, anyhow, and so this horsetail extract we apply the beginning of the season from, for example, bud break on. We apply like maybe almost every 2 weeks for 2 to 3 times, because we realized that in the vintages like 2016 we didn't do that yet, 2021, here we go, 21 or even before, like the vineyards that we applied horsetail decoction, let's say, horsetail decoction, it was hardier. Like when we would do the trellising work, the shoots would be less vulnerable. It doesn't break so easily, see? So that kind of thing was like very interesting. Certain things work better or like easier to employ. But for example, the horsetail decoction, we learned from Poutiot that it is to be employed when the climatic condition is wet and cold. We shouldn't apply it when it's hot and dry, because of silica, you can actually burn the plant. Meaning that we can employ it relatively early in the season, or in the year like 2024 when it's like rainy the whole time and wet and cold, also during the summer. And then so when we say horsetail decoction, we distinguish from just saying tea, because when it's decoction you actually need to boil it, and boil it during 1 hour to extract silica. It's like there is infusion. So infusion is when you bring up the temperature of the liquid to 100 degrees or 90 degrees depending on what you want to extract, and then you put your plant in, you let it still for a couple of hours, and then you filter. So there's a different ways of extracting what you're looking for. Just a side note, but one of the reasons why we really like the approach of Eric Poutiot is because it's precise, and there is a scientific explanation of why and what for and how it works. And then there is fermented extract of nettle, which was fermented but in reductive condition, so that it's actually not a tea because it's fermentation, but it should stay in reductive condition, so it shouldn't brown. It should not be oxidized. So the process of making all these extracts or decoction or infusion or what have you, there is a very precise protocol. It's like very interesting. We can make it ourselves, but it takes a lot of time and you need an equipment. And unfortunately, we are not. It's only Guillaume and me working full time, so we can't make it ourselves yet. We buy it from 2 producers in France, one in Brittany and one in Joly, who produce these medium precisely according to the protocol from Agriculture. Okay, so coming back to the extraction of nettle, it is very powerful and it's also very nutritious. So it's great for the plant, especially when the weather condition is dry and hot. It can help the plant to revitalize itself. But what we realized, communicating through our WhatsApp group, is that it can also induce oidium because it's very nutritional. And but why it induces oidium is because mostly because our vineyard condition is already so prone to disease, because we till our soil during the season. And when we till our soil, the vineyard moves towards the condition which is oxidative. And so when we till the soil, I think it's already better to give up more or less on fermented extracts once you start tilling the soil. We can apply them outside the season, which revitalizes the soil, not necessarily the plant, but the soil. But during the season, it's like very difficult to apply. So that's something that, that's so far the limitation. It's precisely because our vineyard condition is not so far yet to apply these extracts effectively. I have done that in the years like, for example, 2020, 2022, 2023, during the period when it was like very hot and dry, and also in the vineyards of aligoté, because like aligoté is much harder against oidium. So depending on the condition, we can use them, but we're still limited. It's also interesting, there is extract of oregano, thyme and sarriette. And originally it is advised to use when the vineyard is, especially against frost, especially during the beginning of the season when it's wet and cold and we have a frost risk. And then in the WhatsApp group, we realized that actually after the experiment, it worked very well against noctuelle. So these worms that come and eat the buds.
Budworm.
Yeah, budworm. So we have been using that, which we think is also like very useful. In our Savigny Rouge parcel, it's up in the hill, surrounded by the forest, and so it is very susceptible to Suzuki flies because it's cold and wet and humid, which is great for the plant, but it's also great for the insect. They love it. And then funny, so one of the person, she's a young lady who makes these phytotherapy medium. She lives in Jura and she's very learned, and she advances very fast, and she advised me to buy a dried plant of tanesi to make infusion with it, and then spray with it. And so I bought it, but I didn't have the time to use it this year somehow. It was so busy doing other things the whole summer, and so I didn't use it, but I have it. So I think next year I will try it. I will try it out. And then what's also very interesting, very great, is extract of garlic extract. garlic extract made with oil, and that is mixed in your spring, spring liquid. And that is also very effective against oidium. So that's really great, but that's also great against Suzuki worms because they don't like the smell. But the problem with it is that once déraison, once the fruit starts to mature, it also absorbs the odor. So we can't keep on using it. That's why Fanny advised me to make an infusion of Tanesi and try it out. So I think that's what we're gonna try next year, because we kept spraying with the garlic extract. And another thing we love to use, which I'm so thankful to Chandon de Bruyère, is to spray with milk to protect the vines from oidium. Extremely powerful and efficient. I think the person I know who's most experienced with it is Christian from Domaine, because when I was working at Chandon, he was also working at Chandon, and he was spraying with milk, and then he continued that practice at Chandon de Bruyère, so he could advise us with it as well. And then we realized, because we don't spray with tractor, but we spray with a caterpillar, and with a caterpillar, unlike Chandon de Bruyère, we can actually use the whole milk instead of skimmed milk. At Chandon at that time, skimmed milk is fine too, though it works very well. But because the tractor has the function of brassage, that it pumps the liquid to make it homogeneous during the treatment the whole day, and our caterpillar doesn't have that. So if it's a whole milk mixed in your treatment agent, and then it gets this brassage, it actually, how do you call it? It will make the milk separate its cream. You see, so in essence, it starts to make butter, and so that's why at Chandon we used skim milk. And but we think, as we've been using whole milk since 2 years now, we think whole milk is even more powerful. It's not a biological barrier. It's more. It's definitely a physical barrier. It creates a film, and it's very difficult to get washed off. And actually, if you keep treating with milk, then you see, for example, the grapes become shinier. It's very interesting. And even with rain, it doesn't fall off. It doesn't wash out. So that's one of our most favorite. Of course, it's controversial because there's a friend who's saying she knows the milk is very efficient, but she has she's reticent about using, actually food and something that nourishes us to spray in the vines. I totally get that. Sometimes, yeah, it's a question of choice, right? And so we're happy we have a farm nearby where we can source the milk directly, because otherwise, cost-wise, it would be impossible to work.